At his son's graduation, a quiet father is dragged out by two guards for not belonging. No one knew who he was, but seconds later, 10 SEALs stormed the stage, unarmed but with a message. That man wasn't an intruder. He was their commander, and his men still stood with him. The auditorium was packed, buzzing with laughter, camera clicks, and proud families waving signs. Amid the noise, one man sat perfectly still in the last row, back straight, hands resting on his knees, eyes locked on the stage. He wasn't clapping, he wasn't smiling, he wasn't even blinking much. He was just waiting. He hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't taken a program, hadn't even stood when they played the anthem. His jeans were worn, his flannel shirt had seen better days, and the stubble on his face made him look almost out of place among polished guests in suits and heels. Whispers started, then eyes turned. Then a frown from the event coordinator sparked a silent decision. 2 guards made their way down the aisle, firm hands on his arms. No warning, no explanation. "You're not supposed to be here," one said quietly, escorting him out like a thief. Gasps echoed, and someone in the front muttered, "Must be some crazy homeless guy." On stage, his son froze, mouth half open in disbelief, watching the scene with wide, stunned eyes. Then silence. Just for a second, just long enough for something to shift. From the left wing of the stage, then the right, 10 figures emerged, uniformed but unarmed, synchronized like shadows. They didn't run, they didn't shout, they just walked forward slowly with the kind of gravity that made time itself pause. And just like that, the ceremony was no longer about diplomas. It was about truth, and who finally got to speak. He arrived early, too early for most. The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning fog when he parked his battered Ford truck at the edge of the lot, far from the crowds. No bumper stickers, no flags, just dust and a single duffel bag on. The passenger seat. He sat there for a while, engine ticking as it cooled, eyes fixed on the distant gymnasium where the ceremony would take place. Then, without fanfare, he got out. Inside, the setup was already bustling. Staff aligning chairs, photographers adjusting tripods, and early guests chatting in clusters. He avoided them all, slipping in through a side door. The auditorium still smelled faintly of old sweat and fresh wax, that strange mix only high school gyms ever seemed to hold. He chose the last row, center seat. It was the kind of position a soldier would pick. Wide view of all exits, no one behind him. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't bring flowers. He had no family with him. Just a rolled program he found, near an empty seat, and his own steady presence, as if he'd rehearsed this stillness 100 times before. As the place filled, the crowd grew more colorful and animated. Families waved at each other across the room, students in gowns bounced with excitement, and parents jostled for better seats closer to the stage. But he didn't move, not once. His eyes only lifted when a group of graduates began lining up in the wings. That's when he saw him. Second row, third from the left, tall, sharp, his son. The man didn't smile. His expression didn't change. But something in his shoulders softened, the subtlest shift, visible only to someone who knew how to look for it. Pride, not in words or noise, but in presence. Still, others began to notice him. A woman 2 rows, a head turned around, then nudged her husband. They looked back once, twice. A staff member paused near the side wall, whispering into a headset. Nothing loud, just glances. Quiet suspicion, like smoke before fire. And yet, the man remained motionless. He was used to this, being somewhere but never really in it. That's what years of silence taught him, to be present but invisible, to watch and wait and never ask for space that wasn't offered. He barely noticed when the administrator left her place near the podium and began making her way up the aisle toward him. But someone else did. One of the graduates, seated on the stage, had been watching too. His name was Hunter, Navy SEAL, Class of 2017. He narrowed his eyes because he did recognize that man in the last row, and what happened next would depend on whether anyone else listened before it was too late. Angela Wright had run this school's graduation ceremony for 15 years. She was known for precision, tight timelines, clean transitions, no surprises. She wasn't heartless, but she did have a particular allergy to disorder. And from the moment she spotted the man in the back row, something about him unsettled her. She tried to ignore it at first. He hadn't broken any rules. He wasn't disruptive. But in a sea of polished dresses and proud families with iPhones at the ready, he stood out like a scar on a smiling face. His clothes were plain, his posture too still, his presence off. She couldn't explain it better than that. Just off. After 15 minutes of fighting the instinct, she tapped her headset and murmured to security. "Seat 29, back center row. Can someone check him out?" No rush. Just a quiet word. The guards didn't hesitate. One was a retired cop, the other a local hire who worked concerts on weekends. Neither had ever been in combat. Neither recognized the man. Angela watched from the side of the stage as they approached. She expected a quiet conversation, maybe a flash of ID, an awkward misunderstanding followed by a laugh. What she got was a scene. They didn't ask. They assumed. One guard took the lead and leaned in close. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside with us." The man looked up. Calm. Still. "Why?" "Just for a moment. Nothing serious. We'll explain outside." The second guard already had a hand lightly on the man's elbow. It wasn't aggressive, not yet, but it wasn't optional either. "I'm not leaving," the man said quietly, eyes fixed on the stage. "Sir," the first guard insisted, voice tightening, "let's not make this difficult." And that was all it took. Within seconds, the man was on his feet, not fighting, not shouting, just complying, because that's what years of command had taught him. Choose your moment. And this wasn't it. As they walked him up the aisle, whispers turned into murmurs. A girl near the front whispered, "Is he homeless?" A father snapped a photo, as if documenting a disruption he didn't understand. The audience parted like water, unsure whether to pity the man or avoid him. Angela felt a tight knot of discomfort in her stomach. Something about the way he moved, composed, almost dignified, didn't match the story she'd written in her head. She turned to her assistant. "Did he check in at registration?" "No record," the assistant replied. "Name?" Angela shook her head. She didn't know. She hadn't asked. Outside, the man didn't resist. He let them lead him down the steps and out toward the parking lot. He didn't even look back, but someone else did. Hunter from the stage had been watching every second, and now his hand, almost imperceptibly, moved to his earpiece. A private line, one he hadn't used in years, because something was wrong, and somewhere 10 men were already in motion. The double doors at the rear of the auditorium clanged shut behind him. It wasn't loud, but the kind of sound that sticks in the silence that follows. Outside, the spring sun cast a harsh glare across the lot, making everything feel too bright, too exposed. The man blinked once, adjusting to the light. He didn't protest. He didn't ask questions. The guards flanked him like they were walking a suspect out of a courthouse. Neither had noticed the subtle shift in how he carried himself now, chin up, eyes forward, a posture you only earn after years of standing in front of men waiting for your orders. Inside, the ceremony paused briefly, then lurched forward. The principal cleared her throat. "Let's continue," she said into the mic, voice thinner than before, but the room wasn't the same. Conversations flickered. Parents leaned toward each other. A few cell phones were raised to text or search, unsure what exactly had just happened, and on the stage, Ethan, the man's son, was frozen. He had seen his father only briefly, a glimpse in the back as he'd scanned the crowd while taking his seat. It had been enough. That flannel shirt, those worn boots, he knew. And then, just as quickly, he'd watched him be removed like a stray dog. His mind spun. Why hadn't he said something? Why had he just sat there? Why did he look so small? It took him a moment to realize that his name had just been called. Ethan Ross Harper. He didn't move. The crowd waited, confused. A few claps scattered awkwardly. The principal nodded, toward him again. Finally, he stood, walked to the podium, shook the dean's hand. His face was blank, smile forced. Flashbulbs caught nothing of the storm beneath it. Back outside, the man stood beside his truck. The guards didn't search him, didn't ask his name. One muttered, "Best you leave, sir." He didn't respond, just reached into the cab, pulled out something small, a medal in a worn leather pouch, and looked at it for a moment. Then he placed it gently back inside and closed the door. But what none of them saw, not the guards, not the curious onlookers inside, was the black SUV idling quietly across the street. Tinted windows, no plates. Inside, a man in his late 30s adjusted a comms unit tucked behind his ear. He had a scar running from jaw to collarbone, mostly hidden by a neatly trimmed beard. He'd seen the whole thing, and his voice, now low and calm, crackled. Into the silence. Asset confirmed, commander removed. Phase 2 is green. The ceremony pressed on, but something had shifted. It wasn't loud or obvious, not yet, but the air felt different, like a storm brewing somewhere just out of sight. Angela stood near the side curtain, fidgeting with her clipboard more than usual. She glanced toward the empty back row, then back at the crowd. No one had filled the seat. She didn't expect they would. Still, that feeling, that gnawing sense she'd made a mistake, clung to her like static. She didn't know. His name didn't ask. That fact looped in her mind like a skipping record. On stage, graduates continued crossing the stage, their names read one by one, each step met with applause. But in the shadows behind the wings, unnoticed by most, 2 staff members paused by a side entrance. One looked confused, the other uneasy. "Did you see those guys by the parking lot?" one whispered. "Which ones?" "The ones that showed up after the old man left." "Not parents. 2, I don't know. Sharp, quiet, like they were waiting," the other shrugged. "Security, maybe?" But neither moved. Meanwhile, Hunter sat 3 rows behind Ethan on stage. His eyes weren't on the speakers or the crowd, they were fixed on the upper balcony exit. That was where he'd seen movement. Not a threat, not yet, but familiar. Patterns. Men walking with purpose, deliberately casual, as if they weren't trying to go unnoticed, but would disappear if needed. His fingers tapped a code against the wood under his seat. Just twice. A haptic signal. A language few remembered, but all of them still knew. In the audience, several parents stirred. One leaned down to pick up a dropped program. Another adjusted her child's graduation robe. Nothing strange. But across the auditorium, precisely 10 different individuals moved at the same time. Each subtle, each controlled. They weren't together. Not obviously. But they had once worn the same uniform, followed the same man, and now they waited. Backstage, a janitor noticed one of the emergency lights flicker. Odd, he thought. Power had never been an issue in this building. In the parking lot, the SUV was gone. The father, still standing beside his truck, still calm, still watching, but now his hand rested lightly on the hood, like he was waiting for a sign not to act, but to be acknowledged. Inside, Angela adjusted the mic. "We'd like to thank all the families here tonight for their support, for the years you've stood by your children." Then the lights pulsed. Just once, the hum of the PA system cut for half a second, then returned. Most didn't notice, but the ones who needed to, they were already standing. The moment came without a single word, just as the principal stepped up to introduce the keynote speaker, a local business leader who, had donated money for the school's new athletic center. The room dimmed, not completely, just enough for the stage lights to outshine the rest. Angela, sensing something off again, leaned toward the AV technician. "Was that on cue?" He shook his head. "I didn't touch anything." And then it happened. From stage left, the curtain rippled. From stage right, it trembled. 10 men emerged, not charging, not shouting, just walking, boots striking the polished gym floor in perfect unison. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the space like a blade, rhythmical, grounded. Certain, they wore no weapons, no official insignia. Just crisp slacks, solid black t-shirts, and a quiet presence that stole the breath from every corner of the room. Their faces were sharp, not young, not old, weathered, defined, some with beards, some clean-shaven, all with the posture of men who had lived through something no one else in the room could name. The audience froze, no one clapped, no one moved. Even Ethan turned in his seat, staring, heart pounding without knowing why. One of the men, the tallest, with a faint scar above his eyebrow, stepped forward, his boots thudding softly on the wooden risers. The principal backed away from the podium instinctively. Angela was already moving from the side, arms raised, slightly. "Excuse me, you can't..." "Ma'am," the tall man said gently, his voice low but carrying. "With respect, this won't take long." She stopped cold. Something in his eyes made her pulse flicker. He wasn't here for violence, but he also wasn't here for permission. He turned to the crowd, looking over rows of families now sitting in absolute silence. "You removed a man tonight," he said. "Dragged him out for not belonging, for sitting too quietly, for looking like he didn't fit." He paused. "That man was our commanding officer." A murmur rippled through the room. "Years ago," he continued, "he led us through operations that will never be recorded. That saved lives you'll never hear about. He taught us how to stand, how to fall, how to carry men home who couldn't walk." His voice cracked just once, barely, then steadied. "He's not a man of ceremonies. He doesn't wear ribbons, but we do." Because of him, Angela felt her knees weaken. She looked toward the back doors where a figure now stood, still watching, silent. It was him, the father, and now the son saw him too. For a few seconds, no one breathed. The tall seal on stage stepped back, allowing another man, stockier, older, with streaks of silver in his beard, to take his place. He didn't look at the crowd. His eyes were fixed on the figure near the rear entrance, the one who'd been cast out. He raised his chin slightly, a gesture that said more than 1,000 words. Then, loud enough for the room to hear, but soft enough to remain deeply personal, he spoke. "We don't forget who brought us home." Another seal stepped forward, removing something from his back pocket, a simple black box about the size of a wallet. He opened it and turned it outward. Inside, pinned to navy velvet, was a brass badge, the kind not issued lightly. "Lieutenant Commander John Harper," he said. "Retired. Tier 1, Group Echo." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That name hit like thunder. On stage, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Harper. He looked again at the man by the door, his own father. Suddenly, the flannel shirt didn't look out of place. It looked earned. The tired face wasn't ordinary. It was worn from time spent holding lives together under fire. His silence? Not absence. It was weight. The badge was passed down the line, hand to hand, each seal touching it before it reached the tall one again. A ritual, something sacred. Angela didn't speak, couldn't. The audience remained frozen, not out of fear now, but reverence. They were witnessing something no headline could explain, no viral clip could capture. Hunter stepped to the mic. "We gave our word," he said, "to each other, to him, that no matter where we were, if that man ever stood alone, we'd stand." Again, he looked straight at Ethan. "And that includes you, son." Ethan stood slowly, legs stiff, as if the air around him had thickened. His eyes never left his father's. For the first time in years, he didn't see the quiet man who avoided PTA meetings or never smiled in pictures. He saw command, history, honor. He stepped down from the stage, one foot after the other, moving through the stunned crowd toward the back of the room. The seals didn't stop him. They parted just enough, like sentinels, like brothers, like a wall being lifted so that something long buried could finally be reclaimed. Ethan reached the doorway. His father didn't say a word. He didn't need to, because his son was finally looking, truly looking, and what he saw was a man the world had forgotten. But 10 warriors had not. They didn't return to the stage. The seals stood off to the side now, a silent wall of history, while the crowd slowly found their breath again. Some guests looked at their phones, half thinking they should be filming, but no one dared lift a camera. This wasn't a spectacle, it was a reckoning. Angela, standing frozen near the podium, whispered to no one in particular, "Who is he?" A woman in the front row answered without turning around, "Someone we should have thanked before today." Out by the entrance, Ethan stood just feet from his father. "I didn't know," he said. His father's voice was low. "You weren't supposed to." That struck deeper than Ethan expected. "Why?" The man exhaled through his nose, not quite. A sigh, not quite regret. "Some things, they don't come with applause, they just come with weight." Ethan looked at the truck. "They called you an intruder." "I've been called worse." The door to the truck was still open. Inside, on the passenger seat, was the medal, the one he had held after being escorted out. Ethan reached for it. "What is this?" he asked. His father hesitated, then said quietly, "Operation Wild River. Classified. 11 in, 6 out." "I carried 2 of them." Ethan blinked. "That's why your knee—" "Yeah, it came back in flashes now. How his dad always stood with a slight lean. How he never sat too long in one place. How the sound of helicopters on TV always made him flinch just slightly. Why didn't you ever tell me?" His father looked straight at him. "Because I didn't want you to carry it too." Ethan felt a knot rise in his chest. "But I wanted to know you." "You do," his father said, eyes softening. "Right now, right here." Behind them, the seals remained watchful. One of them, the oldest, had begun to cry silently. His hand was on his chest, where his dog tags used to rest. Another stared at the ceiling, blinking fast, willing the tears back. They weren't mourning, they were remembering, and for the first time in a long, long time. So was the man they followed. The gym had quieted into something almost holy. The speeches were over, the music long forgotten. Families whispered now instead of cheering. Some sat frozen, unsure whether to leave or stay. But no one looked away. Back. At the threshold, Ethan stood with the weight of decades pressing onto the span of a single afternoon. "I used to think you didn't care," he said. His father didn't flinch. "I know. You never came to my soccer games. I was deployed. You missed my birthday twice. I was recovering." Ethan's voice cracked. "You never explained. I didn't think I was allowed to." Those words landed with a dull thud in Ethan's chest. He looked at the man, not a decorated soldier now, not a commander, not a myth. Just his father, standing there under flickering fluorescent lights, stripped of pretense, finally real. "I didn't need a superhero," Ethan whispered. "I just needed a reason." "You have it now." There was silence, but this time it wasn't painful. One of the seals stepped forward, a thin man with piercing blue eyes and a limp that told its own story. He reached into his jacket and handed Ethan a small envelope. "He never would have shown you this," the man said, "but you should know what he did for us." Inside was a single photograph. 12 men, camo-streaked, arms over each other's shoulders, dust everywhere, eyes hardened by survival. And in the center, younger but unmistakable, his father, hands still clenched around a radio, mouth mid-shout. Ethan turned it over. A note was scrawled on the back. "He walked us out of hell. If he ever needs us, We run back in. His throat tightened. His father watched him, unsure whether to speak, but Ethan did something instead. He stepped forward and placed the photo gently back in his father's hand. "I think it's time the world knew." The man looked down at the picture. "No," he said, "it's time you did." And the sea was the difference. No one announced the end of the ceremony. There was no official closing. People simply began to stand, slowly, like waking from a dream. The gym doors opened, shoes scuffed against polished floors. Voices returned, but softer now, as if volume itself would dishonor what they'd just witnessed. The SEALs didn't linger. One by one, they approached their commander. Each offered something different: a clasp on the shoulder, a nod, a few murmured words only the two of them would understand. Then they turned and disappeared through different exits, just as quietly as they had come. No grand farewell, no salutes, just men returning to lives no one else would ever fully grasp. Ethan stood beside his father the whole time. Angela approached, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. She looked different now, less certain, more humbled. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. The man nodded once. "You didn't know." She bit her lip. "I should have asked." He offered her a tired smile. "Most people don't." She looked at Ethan, then back at his father. "I hope you'll come to next year's ceremony. You'd be more than welcome." He didn't answer, just extended his hand, not for a shake, just in acknowledgement. Angela turned and walked away, blinking. Fast, outside, the sky had dimmed. The air had cooled. Ethan and his father walked side by side toward the old truck. No more words were needed. There would be time for them later. For now, the silence between them was finally mutual, no longer filled with absence, but presence. A choice to be there together. They reached the vehicle. His father opened the driver's door, paused, then looked at his son. "Want to drive?" Ethan smiled. "I do." As they pulled out of the lot, the gym behind them grew smaller in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in years, the man who once walked unseen was seen. Not as a ghost, not as a threat, but as a father, and as a commander whose men still stood with him, even when the world did not. If this story moved you, take a second to subscribe. Your voice matters here. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of this story stayed with you the most? We'd love to hear from you below.